There's only one story in town today. Of course, as we all know, those seismic resignations last night. The Health Secretary and then within a few minutes, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Boris Johnson tried to patch his government up last night with some speedy replacements, but just how much longer does he have? Well, I'm delighted to be joined here live in Downing Street with Seb Payne of the Financial Times and, of course, Ben Glaze of the Mirror. Seb, let's start with you. Boris Johnson, of course, Prime Minister's questions today at 12. How's it looking for him?
Not great, and I'm sure it will not be a great Prime Minister's questions either, that Keir Starmer can be quite legend at these events, but you'd have to think it's the most open goal in history to just take a few chunks out of the Prime Minister for the fact he's lost his Chancellor, he's lost his Health Secretary, he's had a trickle of junior ministerial resignations, and we don't think that it's over yet. There will be more people quitting the government, and if he does survive this week, then next week he's facing a potential rule change in the leadership rules of the Tory party, and then could be heaved out by his own MPs before the end of the month. So no, it's not looking good at all.
And it's a terrible day for it, because it's not just Prime Minister's questions, but also the liaison committee. Ben Glaze, what are we expecting there at 3 p.m?
That's right, so you've got the high noon reckoning at PMQs, and then the Prime Minister doesn't have any respite, 'cause a couple of hours later he's off the liaison committee. Now that's the select committee chairmen and women of the various select committees of Parliament, and they're going to give him a proper going over. The Prime Minister tries to avoid these events normally. Every few months he's forced to go and face these select committee chairmen and women, and the Prime Minister does not relish these events, and they have an opportunity. It's not like one question at Prime Minister's questions. They can keep going back to an issue. They can keep pressing him. He's under a huge amount of pressure, and with everything else going on, it is possible we might see a Prime Minister snap this afternoon, I think, at 3 o'clock.
It's extraordinary that this is all happening off the back of the resignation of Christopher Pincher. This is something that many Prime Ministers have faced in the past. There have been, unfortunately, moments of sexual impropriety under just about every Prime Minister since time immemorial. Why has this become the crunch point for Boris Johnson?
Well, to use the very tortured analogy that's been in far too many columns, it is the Ernest Hemingway gradually then suddenly thing, that a lot of the pressures against Boris Johnson have been building up for months, if not years, and we know that Rishi Sunak was very unhappy with the direction of fiscal policy for pretty much the last year. He thought about resigning at the end of last year when more COVID restrictions were introduced just before Christmas. And I think it's also that, but also this issue about morality, about the truth, and about how you run a government competently. And that's the thing that unites Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid's resignation. So I think it's really a head of steam that has just built up, and the pressure against Boris Johnson has been huge. But we always thought we'd just take one more thing to snap, and that will be it. And that's exactly what happened with this Chris Pincher affair, because I think for a lot of MPs, but also these ministers and members of the government who've resigned, they've just thought, that's it, I'm fed up, I'm had enough, I can't do this anymore.
And can Boris survive this? I mean, he seems to have got out of so many scrapes in the past. Is this just one scrape too many now?
I think we are seeing the end of this premiership. Last night, when an aide apparently asked the Prime Minister, are you going to resign over this? He used relatively colourful language to dismiss the idea that he would go. But in the same way that it's proved too much for Rishi Sunak, proved too much for Sajid Javid, eventually it might prove too much for this Prime Minister. The grease piglet, as David Cameron referred to him, he's got away with so much, but eventually things just build up. And he's got a young family, he earned a lot of money as a Daily Telegraph columnist, he's basically took a pay cut to become Prime Minister. He might look at it all and think, do you know what, I've had enough of this. I think it's unlikely. I think he'll have to be forced out by the 1922. But the pressure that builds, it is unsustainable, and I think we will see a change behind us in number 10, probably before the summer recess.
And then we get down to the question of timing. David Cameron, back in 2016, wanted to have this long 3-month graceful exit, sort of to plan his way out of the world stage, a number of summits at that time. It didn't quite go to plan for him then. I've been looking at the lists of Prime Ministers and their tenure. In 2 days' time, Boris Johnson overtakes Neville Chamberlain. He's already overtaken Gordon Brown, but in 29 days, he overtakes Theresa May. Will he beat Theresa May?
I think it's looking unlikely at the moment. I think when you've lost your Chancellor and Health Secretary, it's really hard to see how you can survive that long period. And as sort of Ben was saying, we've got these rule changes coming next week in terms of potential rule changes, how the Tory party elects its leaders. I think it's more likely than not he will not make it to summer recess at this point. But it is Boris Johnson. He always has the hide of a rhinoceros, and I do think it's possible he will just try and battle it out, but the odds are surely against him at this point.
To some extent, is there an argument that if Boris Johnson wants to, for argument's sake, skip ahead of Theresa May in terms of how long he's serving as Prime Minister, if he were to set a resignation date, set a relatively leisurely timetable for a replacement leadership election, might that be a better position for him?
I don't think he'll do that. You think back to 2016, as you mentioned. I was on David Cameron's plane when he flew to the NATO summit in Warsaw. That he was on his way out. He knew he was going. It was his last hurrah on the international stage, and it was taken out of his hands. And that was a relatively competent Prime Minister who believed in standards of propriety and ethics, not Boris Johnson. Boris will try to evade this for as long as possible. I don't think he will come to some sort of deal with the 1922 where there is a negotiated exit, as it was with Theresa May when the man in grey suits, Sir Graham Brady, went to her and said, "Look, game's up. If you don't set a date for your departure, we'll change the rules, so you have to go anyway." I don't think that will exist with this Prime Minister. That sort of negotiation just won't take place. It's not in his character.
So just finally in this conversation, let's look ahead to leadership. If you two were betting men, who would you have your money on in terms of becoming the next Tory leader?
I've always thought Nadhim Zahawi was underrated as a leadership contender, as someone who could come through the middle and be a slight sort of compromise candidate between, say, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss being, two of the other notable contenders. His decision to take up the Chancellor position is clearly part of what he thinks will be a leadership contest. And I think in those final two, because of course Tory MPs have to whittle it down to two candidates that then go out to the party membership, I think there will be one candidate from the cabinet there. And at the moment, I think it's more likely to be, say, Nadhim Zahawi than Liz Truss, because he is at the position now, has gone in to shore up the Prime Minister, stabilise the market, stabilise the economy, and Boris Johnson's acolytes, who will be rather angry with Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid, will look at Nadhim Zahawi and go, OK, he's the man who helped the Prime Minister in his hour of need, he's the best man for that. But then I think he will probably face another contender outside the cabinet. Obviously, I think Sajid Javid probably will run. We'll see how well he does. He ran in 2019, not hugely successfully. Jeremy Hunt, the former Health Secretary, he will run. It will be a cast of hundreds in that contest. But at the moment, I think the Tory party is so febrile, no one quite knows where it's going, what its next election pictures, or even who it could be facing as Labour leader. Because don't forget, on top of all this, you've got Durham Police's decision on the Beergate scandal coming this week as well. You would not want to bet on what kind of person the Tory party wants, never mind exactly who it is.
And Ben Glaze, if you were a betting man, I suppose one of the things keeping Boris Johnson in place for as long as he has been over these past few months is it's such an open field.
Yeah, I think we need to look at Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. He's quietly got on with his job. He has the respect of colleagues in the Cabinet, and he is topping the poll of members, the Conservative Home polls that they do. Obviously, he's had a higher profile because of what's going on in Ukraine, but he's getting on with the job. If you want quiet, sensible, and after 3 years of Boris Johnson, that might be exactly what the party and the country is looking for. I think you need to look at Ben Wallace quite a lot. I think, if he wins the ballot, or if he gets onto the final two, because it's whittled down by the Conservative MPs before it goes to the membership, I think he could stand a very good chance.
Well, really interesting stuff there. Seb Payne, Ben Glaze, thank you so much for joining us here in Downing Street, talking through all of those various issues. It will be a fascinating, not just 24 hours, but of course, week until those 22 elections. Thanks for joining us here on The Briefing.